What is a true fact so baffling, it should be false? There used to be a radioactive energy drink called Radithor that was in the US market for a decade from 1918 to 1928. Some of the more prominent users had to be buried in lead coffins. There is a 1 in roughly 5.2 to the 61st power chance that if you were to slap a table, all of the molecules in your hand and the table would miss each other and your hand would go through it. Story time. I learned this fact from a deep intellectual conversation with my engineering class 2 years ago, so there very well could be some kind of detail I'm missing here, but nonetheless, what I said is theoretically true. Giant squids have a donut-shaped brain so their esophagus can run through the middle. If they try to swallow too large a bite of food they can get brain damage. You could take away all of Wayne Gretzky's goals that he scored during his career and he would still be the all-time NHL points leader off his assists alone. Bonus Gretzky fact, he and his brother own the record for being the highest scoring pair of siblings. Brent had 4 points in his whole career. The youngest mother to give birth became pregnant at 4 years old. If a gorilla looks grumpy, it's because they are relaxed and at ease. Greenland extends east of, west of, south of and north of Iceland. The USA is the third most populated nation on Earth. If you were able to add 1 billion people to the US population today, it would still be the third most populated nation on Earth. A morbidly obese person can survive with absolute starvation without any sickness or feeling ill, under close control. There have been studies since 60s. There is a patient in 1973 who went under a 382-day starvation diet for therapeutic purposes under close control with only vitamin and mineral supplements and water intake without protein, carbohydrate or fat intake, no food at all. Dropped from 207 kilograms to 88 kilograms and maintained it. After a follow-up checkup 5 years later, the patient was 96 kilograms, stabilized. Prolonged fasting had no ill effects. If anybody is curious about the article, the PubMed ID is PUC2495396. People were deliberately infected with malaria to cure their syphilis, and the man who developed this treatment, Julius Wagner Jurek, received the Nobel Prize for it. The extremely high fevers of the malaria infections killed the syphilis bacteria, then the patients were cured of the malaria using quinine. Giraffes eat bones. Ireland was a net exporter of food during the Great Potato Famine. More people died making the V-2 rockets during World War II than were killed by them. TSA's fail rate is over 80%. I personally know someone who in his carry-on accidentally packed a loaded handgun, made it on the plane, and was so freaked out when he landed, he UPS'd it back home and took a Greyhound bus after his trip. The life of Frane Salak, the luckiest unlucky man in the world. January 1962, Frane is riding on a train through a freezing canyon when it fell into an icy river. All 17 other passengers died while he escapes with a broken arm and hypothermia. 1963 on his first plane trip he was sucked out of the plane's door and landed in a haystack, unscathed. 19 other people were killed in the crash. 1966 he was riding in a bus when it skidded off the road into yet another icy river. 4 passengers drowned while he only received some minor cuts and bruises. 1970 his car's engine burst into flames while he was driving, but he managed to escape before it exploded. 1973 in yet another driving incident, his car's engine was doused with hot oil from a broken fuel pump. This caused flames to shoot through the air vents, singing off all of his hair. He was otherwise unharmed. 1995 he was hit by a bus but only sustained minor injuries. 1996 to escape a head-on collision with a United Nations truck on a mountain curve, he swerved into a guardrail that broke on impact. To save himself, he jumped out of his car's open door and grabbed onto a tree branch as he watched his car plummet off the cliff. Suffice to say, the guy had a complicated relationship with the Grim Reaper. The gravity of black holes is so great that it literally bends light around the black hole, so that if you could somehow stand close enough to a black hole and look straight ahead, you would actually see the back of your own head. Taser is actually an acronym for Thomas A. Swift's electric rifle. TACR. The color orange is named after the fruit. An eyewitness to Lincoln's assassination at Ford's Theater told his story on national television. Edit, based on suggestions below, I'm proposing a new version of this factoid which makes it sound even crazier, but still factually true. An eyewitness to Lincoln's assassination at Ford's Theater appeared as a contestant on a nationally televised game show with Lucille Ball. President John Tyler, born in 1790, has 2 living grandsons. Sharks evolved before trees did. Switzerland has accidentally invaded Liechtenstein thrice in the last 50 years. On the first time in 1976, Swiss military got lost and ended up in Liechtenstein, so the Liechtensteiners offered them drinks like proper hosts. On the second time in 1992, Swiss military forgot that a certain observation post was actually not in Swiss territory but in Liechtenstein territory, so they just said sorry and forgot about it. Then again in 2007, the Swiss army got lost and entered Liechtenstein, but eventually realized they weren't in Switzerland anymore, Toto, so they turned back. Liechtenstein didn't even know this happened till the Swiss apologized, again, to which they basically said, no problem, bro. Takeaways: the Swiss army are bad with directions. The Liechtenstein army people are chill brothers. Mike the Headless Chicken lived without a head for 18 months. Only 4 people have been to the Challenger Deep, the deepest part of the ocean. One of those people is James Cameron, the director of Titanic. From 1613 and 1620 a samurai traveled to Rome by way of Mexico. During this time, Shakespeare was still alive, Virginia had been founded for around a decade, Galileo was accused of heresy, and Pocahontas arrived in England. He met the Pope, he was made a Roman citizen. His name was Hasekura Tsunonaga, and was the last Japanese person to officially visit Europe until around 1860. Cheetahs can't roar, but they can meow like house cats. A 500-pound, cigarette-smoking, beer-drinking brown bear named Wojtek was enlisted and served in the Polish army during World War II. Private Wojtek helped the Polish win the brutal Battle of Monte Cassino, and was even promoted to corporal. Following the war, he retired in Scotland. The longest time between 2 twins being born is 87 days. There is no universally accepted definition of vegetable. It's a cultural and culinary term, and varies from place to place. There was this French guy named Tarare in the late 1700s that could eat anything, in any amount. He was able to eat a quarter of a cow on one day and ate dinner for 15 for one meal when he was being tested. He was even able to swallow an entire eel, with bones included, without hesitating. When he went to the military service, they used him as message transport, but after being captured he went back and tried to find a cure. In the hospital where he was staying, he was suspected of eating a baby, so they kicked him out. He was average weight, and when he died a few years later they could see inside his stomach just by opening his mouth. Here's a video which explains it on better detail. If you're launching from Earth, the most difficult place to reach in the solar system is the Sun. The reason for this is that to fly directly into the Sun you need to first launch from Earth, and then remove all of your orbital velocity around the Sun. Anything less will just put you into a different orbit around the Sun rather than directly into it. The amount of power required for that to do it directly is basically impossible currently. As an alternative, you could, for relatively little power, fly all the way out to Pluto distance, slow down much less, and then fall back into the sun. The trade-off being the travel time is now about 90 years. There are other in-between paths that could get you there for different balances of energy and time, but all of them are tougher than getting basically anywhere else in the solar system with an equivalent balance. There's a mission currently traveling to study the sun, the Parker Solar Probe. It won't be flying directly in, but plans to make the closest passes than any probe ever has. It's going to make 7 passes by Venus to shed speed, so it can get closer and closer to the sun. The full flight time is planned as just less than 7 years. As of this post, they are 1 week shy of a year in. In chess there are over 9 million variations after just 3 moves each. 288 billion different possible positions after 4 moves each. In a complete game there are more possible positions than there are electrons in the observable universe.